Really nice to be in this beautiful and fascinating building too. I spent the day walking around and enjoying myself and meeting the staff. Beautiful, great building you've got. I really like the glass with the names etched in it. But for the longest time I assumed it was like alumni and donors and so on. I was really impressed, you know. Wow, Sarah McLachlan. That was like Laura Secord. Wow, that's good. When I saw Queen Victoria, I realized, okay, wait. But impressive to see all those names and inspirational. I noticed that Queen Victoria was in a big font, but Hayley Wickenheiser was an even bigger font, you know, only in Canada. Spent some time with the counseling staff. You know, schools now have counselors. And we sat around a table and we talked about mental health. And every school in Canada does this now, and in the States. I know those of you who went to school in Canada know that we didn't have this kind of, we had guidance counselors in our high schools, but we didn't have the kind of staff that schools do now. And universities too, by the way. Universities have huge and growing mental health centers on campuses. And they're having trouble, a great deal of trouble, keeping up with the number of young people looking for service. So these were the kinds of things I was talking about with your staff. They're very proud of your girls. They're proud of the school, and they're impressed with the young people coming through the school. Bright and hard-working students. We talked about their experience, and what I heard was some of the things I heard today, and I hear them in other schools too. Description of girls feeling like they're being evaluated all the time. Description of girls saying they're burdened by the amount of work, but they're not necessarily challenged by it. A repeated theme coming up in the conversations was competitiveness, struggling with the competition. And for sure throughout the day, the main subject throughout all of the conversations was a particular emotion. Do you know which one it is? Anxiety. Yeah. And I'm not surprised. We're in the midst of probably what could be called an anxiety epidemic at this point. We're diagnosing children with anxiety disorders at unprecedented rates. And even the kids that aren't getting diagnosed, we're seeing much more higher levels of stress in our young people, which is obviously very concerning. It's also kind of stupid, if I can put it that way, when you realize that they're also the safest children to ever walk the planet. You know, there's something really wrong about this. That we're raising very, very anxious young people when they're so safe. And then they get so anxious we have to treat them for a mental health problem that we call anxiety. You know, one of the interesting things, and a really important thing to think about tonight as we talk about children's emotional growth, and as we talk about anxiety, is to remember that anxiety, for sure, is now a mental health problem, but it shouldn't be. That at its best, anxiety is a really useful and important human emotion. You know, and you see that from time to time as a parent. I have two kids, well, kidults, adolescents, as I like to call them, 23 and 21. My daughter, by the way, 23 years old, has graduated from her undergraduate degree, and she's living back home with me, the boomerang effect. She's back. Yeah. And we have a new name for it. We've got a new stage of development. After adolescence, we call it emerging adulthood. And it goes from 18 to 28. And I'm in the midst of it. Claire is now 23, Sam's 21. My son Sam, when Sam turned 16, the day he turned 16, he went downtown and took his test to get his G1, the ticket in Ontario that allows you to practice driving with your dad in the car. That's my standard transmission Volkswagen, clunking around the neighborhood. And you know, suddenly Sam was one of the most devoted learners I'd ever seen. Got his work ethic went right up. We practiced and worked at it. I mean, he was really focused on driving. And the day that he could take his road test, and that's to get his G2, that's the permit to drive without his father in the car, he gets up and goes downtown and takes his test, and bad news, he passed. Now, I don't know if any of you have been in that moment where your child says to you, Dad, Mom, can I have the car keys? Talk about anxiety, right? our anxiety now, which has also got to be one of our themes. In that moment, a lot of things go through your head like, no, we sold the car, We're a cycling family now, Sam. But you don't. You turn the keys over and off he goes out into the big bad world full of danger. Behind the wheel of an automobile. He's dangerous himself. It's scary, but then what happens is life goes on and Sam's driving and it's a couple months later, it's a Sunday, and Sam needs a car for something, and off he goes to run his errand. He comes back about 15 minutes earlier than expected. We thought he'd gone for a bit. He's right back, and he's looking a bit weird. And it turns out, he got a ticket. He got a traffic ticket. Moving violation. Rolling through a stop sign. And at first he was sort of like, stupid cop, I wasn't really rolling that fast. But $120 ticket and 3 demerit points, these got his attention. So, all of a sudden, now we're driving around the neighborhood together and he practically puts the parking brake on at every stop sign. Cops are like jumping out of bushes everywhere, right? What emotion is he feeling? Anxiety. He's anxious about getting it. He's anxious about, and I'm happy about it. I am, right? It sounds like a punchline, and it is, but it's actually true. We actually want our children to be adaptively anxious. They need to be anxious about the right things in the right degree. And if they're not, they're in big trouble. Anxiety is an emotion in the fear family of emotions. Fear, one of the most basic emotions to all animal life. Every animal has fear. It's way back in the lizard brain that we have carrying around the base of our brain. Very primitive animal response to danger. It's an in-the-moment response to threat. The fight-flight reflex. If you don't have fear, you die in the animal world, right? You're a zebra, you think lions are cute, you're done, right? You need fear. And one of the things to note about fear, by the way, before we get to anxiety, is fear has an override switch. When you have a fear response, your brain is doing the fear thing and it's not doing anything else. You're not wondering what you're going to make for dinner. You're not wondering how you look now because you're having a bad hair day. You don't care. You're just fighting or taking, when fear is in the system, that's all your brain is going to do. Anxiety is a lot like fear, except it's always anticipatory. Anxiety is the anticipation of something, which, if it were to happen, would be fearful. That's what it is. So anxiety equals fear plus planning. You need your lizard brain and your human brain to feel anxiety. And we're the only species with this part of the brain, we're the only species with anxiety. And if you think about it, anxiety is what actually sets us apart from the animal kingdom. It's the quintessential human emotion. Picture our caveman ancestors sitting around the cave, some cold autumn day, the winter winds are beginning to blow, and some smart caveman, or probably cavewoman actually, says, uh-oh, winter's coming, better renovate the cave. Guys, get out and get some more meat and some furs, and we start to anticipate things. And we build villages, and we domesticate animals, and cultivate crops, and we remember that the Huns came over that hill, so we'll build a wall before they come. Right? You can see so many of these steps of civilization are all in the service of making sure that the future's okay. Our capacity to worry now and plan for the future is what sets us apart from the animal kingdom. It's a reminder of how important it is for your child to grow up to be adaptively anxious. Our kids aren't going to grow up to be hunter-gatherers. They're living in 2017. They're going to be living, this is a very think-ahead society. We have to be thinking about all kinds of stuff in the future. Job performance reviews and mortgage payments and our children's education savings plans down the, it goes on and on. We're constantly looking ahead, and that's why we all live with anxiety. The problem with anxiety is we can very easily get too worried about something that isn't as great a threat as we think it is. Right? We can exaggerate the threat in our minds. The other problem with anxiety is that while fear goes with flight, anxiety goes with avoidance. Let's picture someone being anxious. Let's picture a 6-year-old girl who is going to have an anxious moment. Let's say she's playing ice hockey. In the summer, she says to you, Mom and Dad, sign me up for House League ice hockey. I want to be Hayley Wickenheiser. I can't be Queen Victoria. I'm going to be Hayley Wickenheiser. Sign me up. You take her out to House League hockey. She goes the first week, and it's way harder than she ever expected. Every time she tries to shoot, she falls over. The coach seems mean. He's kind of yelling. All the other girls seem better than her. Her toes freeze. She falls over 17 times. She counts. It's a tough Saturday. The next week, a week goes by, she's at home, she's watching Dora the Explorer in her PJs eating Fruit Loops. About as low as you can be on the anxiety scale without being dead, right? Chilled right out. Okay, so we'll have a little, can you picture, I told you this is where a PowerPoint would be handy. Okay, here's a graph, okay? And on this axis, we'll put anxiety from really low to moderate to getting bad to getting me freaked out, oh my God, to panic, okay, something like that. And on this axis, we'll put time. Really seconds and minutes ticking away. Let's picture her mind. She's watching Dora the Explorer. Things are good. Ultimately, they might get boring, by the way. Very little anxiety equals boredom. So she's watching Dora the Explorer, she's hanging out, you poke your head in and you say, okay, time to go to hockey, 10 minutes. She starts to anticipate. What happens to her anxiety? It starts to build. What happens when it gets into this uncomfortable range? What does she do? What does every 6-year-old do? What does she try? Stomach ache. I once asked that question to a group of 6-year-olds, and a boy said, tell them you've got a broken ankle. And then the boy next to him said, no, they can check that. Do the stomach ache. Every kid knows this, right? Try to get out of it. I don't want to go to hockey, you got a tummy ache. Okay. So now, we're right here. I don't want to go to hockey. What happens if you say, okay, we don't have to go to hockey? What happens next? This goes right back down again to Dora the Explorer levels. Okay? From a behavioral perspective, this moment is very reinforcing. That was a wonderful payoff. That felt great. Anxiety doesn't feel good. And because it felt so good, the next week I'm going to avoid even sooner. Week 3, by week 4 I've quit. Avoidance is addictive. It's one of the big problems with anxiety. Most parents know this intuitively. So they say, I know it was tough last week, but we got to go to hockey. I don't want to go to hockey, the coach is mean. I know it was a tough week last week, we got to go, we're leaving in 10 minutes. We lend our children our adult will, right? Get her out the door, into the car, and maybe her anxiety continues to climb. You get to the rink and the coach looks meaner than ever, right? Get into the dressing room and there was a men's league game there last night. It really stinks. Right? Now you want to go home. Okay? Yeah. And it can feel like, so when you're on this uphill, you can picture this anxiety curve, when you're on the uphill, it can feel like your head's going to blow off. Like it's just awful on this upswing. But what happens is, always with anxiety, psychiatrists call this the anxiety hill. It always plateaus, stops building. It might be at a fairly high rate still. She gets out on the ice, it's freaky, now she's trying to skate again. They have a warm-up, she gets to know, she's introduced to the girls on her line. They go out, they almost score. She gets off, the coach taps her on the back of the helmet, great shift. All of a sudden, she's eyeing the gate to get back on the ice. What's happened to her anxiety? Well, it's gone up, it plateaued, and now it's dropped down a bit. It's in a moderate range. There's still lots of anxiety in the system. It's dropped down though. But yeah, she's anxious. There's sharp skates, there's competition, she's vigilant, she's alert, the coach is still yelling. So there's a lot of the anxiety system operative, but it no longer feels toxic. She's on it's about the same level as it was when she tried to avoid. If I had a PowerPoint slide out, it illustrated that beautifully. But you can see what I'm talking about here, right? She's now in a really useful psychological state to learn about. Once we get to the other side of the hill, and we're on the ice and we're into the game, like she is now, we're in a psychological state that social scientists call flow. F-L-O-W. They've been researching it for 30, 40 years now. We know a lot about it. One of the things we know about it is it's the prime ingredient of human happiness. Lives with flow are happy lives. None of us are in a flow state all the time. All of us are in flow some of the time. We're in a flow state when what we're doing has become intrinsically interesting and rewarding. We're doing it for its own sake, because it gives us a sense of mastery, or satisfaction, or competence. When we're in a deep flow state, we get to the end of what we're doing and we realize we're hungry. That's what flow is. And flow always happens on the other side of the anxiety hill, because flow always happens out in the big world out there and all of its complexity, all of its frustrating nature. That's why it feels so good, because we're mastering it. We have a problem right now. We see a lot of kids, especially in high school, by the time they get to high school, their attitude towards schoolwork. We would love kids to come to high school and find a little bit of flow, right, in their work. But we see too much of the opposite. We see young people who are down here, and what they're doing is procrastinating. They'll call it watching Netflix, but it's really procrastinating. Okay? It's actually an avoided symptom. And they're on Facebook, they're on social media, but they're not doing their essay, and they're not doing their science lab, and they're not studying for history. They're learning about home decorating. A lot about home decorating. My daughter did. So what they're doing, avoiding until the 11th hour, where now no more avoiding can be done. What happens to the anxiety scale now? Boing! We're up here in like panic range. It's awful. Doors are slammed, cups are thrown, moaning, groaning, hair is pulled. The work is done. And when it's done, where am I going to go? Where am I headed? This sucks. This is not flow, is it? Remember what, again, PowerPoint would be handy, but I'd flow around here, right? We're way up in panic. So where am I headed? All the way back down again. So we have a generation of young people who are ping-ponging between boredom and panic. And they're missing the sweet spot in the middle. That's where we really want them to be adaptively anxious. Okay, so what's going on? Well, what's happening is we've absolutely 100% changed the way we raise children. And we've done it in 100 years. The way we used to do it, for the first 20,000 years of child rearing, they were not pretty. We did not do a good job. I'm not trying to create a utopia of the past. Children died in disturbing numbers, and they were routinely neglected and abused. We're much more aware of what children need from us, and for the most part, it's a very good thing. But what's happened when we weren't looking, we suddenly took, in some ways, children's childhood away from them, because they're no longer having an apprenticeship in reality. Instead, children are growing up their entire lives in adult, controlled realities. They're very infrequently out there in the wild fending for themselves, learning how to be anxious. The way we learn to be adaptively anxious is by trial and error, and doing something that hurts and realizing, ow, that hurt, don't do that again. And then we get a little bit anxious about that thing. We're going to call that model of learning through non-catastrophic, painful failure. That's how people learn to respect the world around them. Again, kids aren't having enough opportunity to learn that way. Why? Well, because look at how their lives are structured. When kids go out to play these days, there's less and less play just out in the streets in our communities. We raise our children in villages less and less. Generally, play is going to happen through a play date, often where parents have been involved in arranging and checking up on behavior later. If I'm playing sports, it's probably organized sports. It's increasingly organized sports, where we parents, of course, we worry about skill development and how good the coach is. Look how involved we are in their education. Way more than any generation before us. In Ontario, public schools, they have an agenda book system. And I think that's probably alive and well here in British Columbia too, where teachers put the homework in the agenda book, and the agenda book goes home, and mom's hand goes into knapsack and pulls out agenda book. to oversee homework while cooking a nutritious meal and monitoring screen time. You have to have an island kitchen to raise children. How else could you do all these things at once? To check the homework, to sign off that it's been done. Agenda book back in knapsack, knapsack goes to school, teacher's hand in the knapsack. This is not an agenda book, it's a homework espionage log. And so, us adults are hovering over children's experience all the time. One way to really drive this home is to get you to imagine yourself in a particular situation with your child. It really brings to light the kind of context in which we're all raising our children. We're all victims of this shift. I mean, victims, we're beneficiaries too. We know a lot more about kids, it's great. But we're all caught up in something bigger than ourselves. Picture yourselves in a park for a moment. Imagine you're in your neighborhood park with your daughter. Let's make her 4 years old. You may have to go back in time. Okay? You're hanging out, it's a nice sunny day, you've been to Starbucks, you're sipping your latte on the park bench. Okay? And you weren't expecting this, but she's decided to go into the sandbox to play in the sand for a bit. You've not brought any sand toys today. Bad parent. There's a much better parent than you at the park today. She supplies her daughter with all the latest and greatest sand play equipment, designed to build neuronal connections. So she's in there rocking her sand toys, the castle mold and the sifter, the little wheel that spins. And so your girl is in there ready to create some play, but wow, look at this stuff. It's unbelievably good stuff. She wants it. The other girl is not giving it up, but she really wants it. Still, no, there's a struggle in the sandbox. And in the struggle, your daughter bonks her on the head with the sifter. And she starts to cry. Okay? Now, I want you you're over there on your bench with your latte, as mentioned. Now, imagine that another parent who's closer to the scene steps in and talks to your child sternly. Hey, you can't do that. You can't just take her stuff. Look, you made her cry. That's not okay. Now give it back. That's not all right. Okay. That got your attention, right? That's an intense moment. Right? Question, what would you do? As you think about that question, let me make a suggestion to you. Whatever you're going to do next in that moment is very likely to be driven by your emotions. In an intense moment like this, and in fact, in a lot of our parenting, what we do is emotion-driven. So a really great rule of thumb in parenting, cannot stress this one enough, is this. If you can identify what you're feeling, if you can name your emotion, now you have a fighting chance of not necessarily acting out on it. You're just a chance, but at least you have a chance. You still might, but at least you have a chance. If you don't name the feeling, you're doomed to act out on that feeling. It's going to go right into behavior. So the real question here is, what's your emotional response to this scene? What are you feeling? There's no right or wrong answer here. What comes to mind?
Anger.
Anger. I know you're not the only one. Yeah. And we're talking anger at the other parent, right? Excuse me, buddy, I'm the parent here. I'll do the parenting. Thank you very much. Maybe push him over on your way to the sandbox, right? Yeah. Push him out of the way anyway. Yeah, for sure. You're not alone. Any other responses?
Guilt.
Sorry?
Guilt.
Guilt, yeah. And you're not alone, for sure. Embarrassment. Kind of like, is it because kind of like you just bonked her on the head with the sifter? Is that... Yeah. Guilt over her conduct? Yeah. Because I've had some parents say, feeling guilty that they didn't bring the right sand equipment. It should never have happened in the first place. These emotions, the anger, the guilty, embarrassed response, as if I just bonked her on the head with the sifter, they really illustrate our generation of parents because they tell you how deeply we identify with the parenting role. We really see ourselves as on the hook for our kids' behavior. What that means is when our kids screw up in the world, it's very easy for us to feel like it's a sign of parental incompetence. And we don't even know that's what we're feeling. It's an implicit, in the background idea. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to suggest that a lot of you have been operating with this in your mind without even realizing it. When my kid screws up in the world, it's a sign that I've screwed up. You know it's not logical, you know it's not true. But it has an emotional truth that's so compelling to our generation of parents that it's very likely, unless you were able to name those emotions, that you're going to get up off that park bench and into that sandbox, saying to your daughter, "Hey, what are you doing? That's not okay. Give her stuff back." "Oh, right, you already did, because I'm reparenting here." What's best for your child? Here there's a clear right and wrong. What's best for your child is that you stay in that park bench, for sure. And maybe thank that parent later if you can. If you're just keeping yourself from pushing them over, just stay in the park bench. Why is it better? Because in the first instance, what he just learned was, when I do dumb stuff, bad stuff happens. It's a natural consequence. It's a non-catastrophic, painful failure, and it's how we learn. It's not how we sometimes learn, it's how we always learn. What does he learn, though, when you get off the bench and get in his face? He learns, when I do dumb stuff, Mom freaks out, Dad freaks out. And instead of learning how to manage herself in the big bad world, she learns how to manage you. And that's what our kids are getting better and better at, managing our adult minds. Because we really are turning them into pleasers, appeasers. We have two different types of anxiety problems right now. I'm going to call them the boys style and the girls style. But girls go for the boys style and boys go, but you'll see why I name it that way. One young man who dropped out of first-year university, he's a growing demographic. 1 in 3 first-year students drop out. 30%. They're not ready. This boy, Stephen, came from a good family in Toronto. He's one of those guys, though, whose favorite subjects were like gym and recess. So for his mom and dad, every parent-teacher interview was kind of the same. It's, "Oh, you're Stephen's parents, lovely to meet you, great boy, never a behavior problem, cooperative, not really living up to his potential, not doing all the work." So mom and dad would go back home and say, "Come on, Stephen, we need to see more effort out of you. This isn't good enough." And when he was 2, and it was appropriate, Stephen would say, "Okay, I'll try harder." And then in grade 5, when they said it again, he said, "Okay, I'll try harder." And in grade 8, he said, "Okay, I'll try harder." And then in grade 10, he said, "Okay, I'll try harder." But it seemed clear to Stephen's parents that no matter what, one thing was clear: they had to keep on the job. Because if they stopped managing him like this, he would do nothing. So they stayed on him, and they monitored his tests, and they threatened to take his cell phone away if he didn't get a better mark. And he learned how to do enough to please them, and as he got older, he learned how to, well, frankly, lie. Please and appease, avoid and evade. But they were very diligent parents, and together Stephen and his parents graduated high school with a 74. And they were accepted into Concordia University, which is where they headed at the end of August. Mom and Dad, launching him on his new career, hopes high, headed back to Toronto. Stephen loved it. Next week was Frosh Week. Best week of his life. Had a ball. But the following Monday, classes began, and Stephen crossed the campus to his first class. He was a bit late, a bit hungover. He got a seat in an auditorium bigger than this, way at the back, the stack of papers, course description. They were all stapled together, the course description, when the tests would be, when the exams, when the essays due. Then there were 3 pages of required readings. And then there were 6 pages of recommended readings. You just skip those, they're only recommended. He counted the page, 10 pages. This isn't the readings themselves, this is just the names of the readings. You know, his heart gonna sink. He had to read all this stuff and say clever stuff about it to please that professor way down on stage we could hardly see. I mean, it was a despairing moment for him. He went back to his dorm, he waited for his buddies to get back, they went on the town, they did some partying, did some drinking, stayed up as late as he could, crashed, and the next morning he just hit snooze and he never went back to class again. But he was an articulate guy, and here's what he said to me. The first thing he needed to talk about was how terrible he felt about what he'd done to his parents. He was filled with guilt and shame. He sobbed. Big, strong, athletic guy. He said, "My parents are amazing people. They're loving, they're supportive, they gave me every chance to succeed, and I blew it." He felt awful. Then he talked about his vision of life, and he said, "You know, everyone's always told me, go to school, work hard to get good marks, so you can go to a good university. Or you can work hard to get good marks, so you can get a good job. Or you can work hard, you get good money, and then you die." quote. He had a name for this vision. He called it the looming conveyor belt of life. And we're making reality look like this to a lot of young people. And increasingly, young people are jumping off of it, and it's more often the boys than the girls. They're heading to alternative realities, to the bong in the basement, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, anywhere where there's no anxiety at all. And I've seen some young girls go for that as well. If that's the boy solution to the looming conveyor belt of life, can you picture the girl's solution? It's to jump on the conveyor belt and run like that. And you might be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? She's getting good marks, but there's lots wrong with it. These are the young people who are diagnosing with anxiety disorders. They have eating disorders of marks. And in fact, interestingly, eating disorders are getting much less right now because there's another number for people to neurotically fixate on and get a sense of control. It's an unhealthy focus on achievement. Achievement seen as a mark. Picture Cynthia. She's a grade 10 student at a private school in Toronto, an all-girls school. She's been told since grade 9, she's now in grade 10. In grade 9, they said, you've got to know what you're going to be studying at university now so you can start streaming yourself more towards arts or more towards sciences. She's been online, she's a good girl, she's followed the instructions. She's identified McGill pre-med, she needs a 90. If she gets a 92, she gets $1,000 in scholarship money. Marks equal money on the conveyor belt of life. She's dialed in. She needs extracurriculars. She's joined the rowing team. She hates rowing. She's joined the rowing team. It's Sunday. She's been to the soup kitchen for a community service. She's been to rowing practice. She's back home. She's studying for math, her worst subject. Next morning, she's got a math test. She's got to get 90 or above. If she doesn't, the math mark drops below 80, and her overall mark will drop below 90, and this can't happen. This is the way the anxious mind works. She starts to freak out. Mom hears. Mom comes upstairs and tries to help with calculus. Bad idea. Go separate. But then she tries to help with the anxiety. Cynthia, she says, it's okay. Don't worry about it so much. The marks don't matter that much. Big mistake. You don't understand. Cynthia slams the door in Mom's face. Mom can't help. After a fretful night, Cynthia wakes up in the morning. She takes one look at her math textbook, and she has a full-out panic attack. And the family ends up at the hospital as opposed to the school. But even when our young people aren't getting diagnosed with anxiety disorders, we don't like how we're orienting them towards school and achievement because we're turning them into pleasers and appeasers, gold star earners. They achieve wonderful results in a marks-based sense, it's true, and in that first year auditorium they're likely right here with their notebooks out, which is great. And in front of them is a professor, ready to teach them, a cutting-edge researcher, a leader in her field. She's an anthropologist. She's just back from South America where she's spending half a year on sabbatical, living with an Aboriginal tribe in the Amazon rainforest. She's got slides in a shrunken head right there on stage. She's weaving in social theory and science. At one point she uses John Stuart Mill, Sigmund Freud, and Justin Timberlake all in the same sentence. She rocks the lecture. And she gets to the end and she says, okay, great, 15 minutes. Now, any questions? And the questions are right here. One question. What is it?
What's on the exam?
What's going to be on the exam? That's the question. And it's not the question most of the time. It's the question actually every time. Because we've trained these people to ask that. That's how they got there. We trained them to ask that question. We're turning our youth into pleasers and appeasers. They're falling behind in developing their own relationship with school and achievement in the big world out there. These people have to take over after us. Now, I'm generalizing. There's lots of people who don't fit this mold. I'm talking about the trends. So we know there are exceptions. Thank God there are exceptions. And we have our minds. We can pay attention to what's going on. But to take a stand against this takes a historical consciousness. You have to be aware of your place in history. Otherwise, history will operate behind your back. You need to be aware that this is unfolding right now. That society is operating behind your back and making it very hard to respectfully stand back when appropriate and give your child space to strive, fail, and pick herself back up again. You do need to protect her, but you don't want to overprotect her. What does she need most from you? There's a clear answer to that one too. And it's not what you might think. We modern parents put a great deal of energy and devotion into our parenting, especially the instrumental parts of parenting. The guiding, the directing, the protecting, the advising, the overseeing, the reminding, the cajoling, the driving, all active, managerial aspects of parenting. But it's not what they need most from us, especially after we've protected them in the vulnerable early years. What they need most from us is for us to pay attention and see them for who they are and validate their experience. Picture that little girl. She's out of the sandbox, she's 4, she's moved on. She's climbing a big jungle gym in the middle of the park. It's a bit too big for her. She's 4, it's for the 5 and 6-year-olds. Metal bars. She could fall. She could hurt herself. Sometimes kids even get stitches in their chins. But you're going to sit on your park bench and sip your latte. She's struggling away. Struggling away. Not on this side of the hill. She's on this side of the hill. She's in a flow state. She's anxious, but in a wary, playful kind of way. She's vigilant. She could fall, but it's exciting. And lo and behold, she makes it to the top. What's the first thing that 4-year-old does when she gets to the top? For sure. What does she say? Look at Mom. Look at every 4-year-old all over the world says that. And you say, look at you. And when you say that, she sees herself. She needs you to be there to do that. Let's give that moment a name. Minding. Minding our children. Having them in our mind. When we have our children in our mind, they see themselves in our mind. And then they're able to know themselves. Because what happens, he goes, look at me. And you say, wow, look at you. He's like, yeah. Oh, sorry, it's she. She says, look at me. You say, wow, look at you. And she's like, yeah, I'm a kid who climbs stuff. You know? She internalizes that noticing of her. She's, yeah, that's who I am. And notice that what you're not doing here is praising. We went through a period of child development where we thought that what kids needed was praise. We were hung up on the concept of self-esteem. People thought that kids had to feel really good about themselves. And to do so, we praise them all the time. Everybody gets a trophy. It was a bad idea and it didn't work. And we're learning, we'll talk a bit later about the dangers of praise. But notice that in this moment, what she's getting from you isn't praise, but recognition and validation. And that's the number one thing our kids need from us. To pay attention and enjoy the show and see what's going on. We're very good at it. We show up. We're the show-up generation of parents. We have to show up and not be on our phones when we're in the park. We need to pay attention. But we have a couple of things that get in the way of our minding. And I want to name them for you now. The number one thing that interferes with our ability to mind our children in this healthy way. And by the way, this is the dynamic between parent and children that feels the best. Everybody likes the minding moment. The number one thing that interferes with it is our parental anxiety. If I'm too anxious about that little girl in the jungle gym, I'm not sitting on that park bench. I'm up there spotting her, right? Careful, oh, careful! Don't take the purple bars, come take the yellow bars over here, they're closer together. Come on, let's go get on the bobbing chicken, it's more age appropriate. Right? We don't look very good in this mode, okay? We're freaking out. She's actually going to be trying, she's not going to say, look, if she goes to the top, she's not going to say, look at me. She's trying to get away from me. Right? And in fact, there's a real, now we don't want her on a jungle gym where if she fell, it would be catastrophic. We don't want a 2-year-old on this jungle gym. But we do want to let her strive and work away at a jungle gym where she might fall and it might hurt a bit, and she'd learn, but it wouldn't be catastrophic. So that's what we're doing here. And if we're too anxious to let that happen, we don't get that minding moment. And in fact, if you think about that scenario, and if I am up there kind of freaking out, she's very likely going to speed up her climbing efforts. And when she speeds up her climbing efforts, what's likely to happen? She's more likely to fall. The lesson here, right? Because now she's more focused on managing me than managing the big world. The lesson here is, when we let our anxiety get the better of us, we often put our kids at greater risk. because they become more focused on getting around our adult minds and less focused on the actual dangers we're trying to call their attention to. 16-year-old girl whose parents have told her she can't date her boyfriend anymore and won't let her go to any parties in that neighborhood. What does she do? She lies about a sleepover at Susie's house and sneaks out when Susie's mom goes to bed at 11:30, crosses Toronto in the dark on public transit by herself, going to a party in a neighborhood she's never been to where there will be drugs and alcohol that her parents know nothing about. Now she's making really bad decisions. Now she's at risk. Why? Because all she cared about was getting around her parents. We have to be aware of our own anxiety and how it interferes with our ability to mind our kids and respectfully give them a chance to strive in the world. The other impediment to minding our kids, and it's a big one too, is over-identifying with outcome, with their success. Because we put so much of our time and energy and resources into our children, it's only natural that we slide into a place where we need them to succeed, not just for them, but frankly for us too. It's a bit of an embarrassing thing to admit, but it can easily happen. For me, it didn't happen so much with my kids around academics. Where I suffered from this problem was ice hockey, big time. This far from the crazed hockey dad, you know? Watching my kid, like I loved watching my kids play hockey, especially Sam. He played on the same team I played for in Toronto, and I enjoyed watching them, but for a while it was quite painful. How perfectly I needed Sam to play. I mean, I was really into his career, you know, at age 8. He made a good team. You know, you could look on the internet to see who they were playing that night. If it was the first place team, I'd be nervous, like actually nervous. Sam wouldn't even know who they were playing. You know, and when he plays defense, and when they were out there, like I would need him to play a perfect game, and when he made mistakes, it was excruciating. Like if he threw the puck up the middle and it was intercepted, I'd be like, oh my God, what are you doing? Like he just pushed an old lady into the mud, you know? Like all the other hockey, the dads are all looking at me like, yeah, way to go. I'm gonna teach you my kid. And so, you know, so what that meant is after the game, we'd get back in the car and I would need to know, what do the coaches say? You know? He's clearly not reflecting on his sins. He's chatting on about the snack bar lady or something, you know. And no, you know, I need to know, did the coaches talk about that egregious giveaway in the second period? Basically, how else will he learn? You know, we lose perspective. You know, but because I'm a sophisticated psychologist, I can identify what I'm feeling, I can rein it in and not act out on that feeling for about 5 minutes. You know, and then when he sort of comes to a halt, I would throw out, like, as if it were kind of natural. He wouldn't notice. I'd say, so Sam, what did the coaches say? Like casual, you know? And he smelt me coming every time. You know, that easy flow would just stop. I don't know. They could smell our parental agenda. Come on, Sam, you were in there for 20 minutes. What were you I don't know, I couldn't hear them. You know, anything to fend me off. I had to learn with Sam to enjoy his hockey career through his eyes. He plays D, I play forward. I like to go fast and make scoring chances. Sam likes to play physically. He likes to hit guys. You know, and he was the guy who loved to be the guy on his team who had his teammates back. It's the guy who he is. He's studying to be a fireman. You know, it was a part of his nature. And it wasn't the way I wanted him to play hockey. But I had to get my head around the fact that this is the way he's going to play hockey. And for this to be a positive thing in our lives, I have to be his hockey fan. His dad, Sam's hockey fan. And that meant parking all of my identifications with him. So beware of the over-identification with success. We lose separation from our children when we do that. Let me give you an overall kind of framework. I'm sort of saying things here and there. Let me try and pull it together for you a little bit. Let's go back to my brilliant PowerPoint presentation here with a different graph. The first one was such a success. On this one, we're going to put on this axis, let's put responsibility for self. And we'll make it a percentage. 0% responsible for myself to 100% responsible. And on this axis, we'll keep it as time, but we'll make it years. 0 years old to 18 years old when she's leaving her home for Frosh Week. Okay? That's a good way to frame this particular table. Okay. Let's plot a child's developmental curve. When she's 0.0 years old, how responsible for herself is she? 0. And by the time she's 18, how responsible do we need her to be? She lives in Halifax. 100%. Yeah, doesn't mean she's out of your life. She's going to be texting you daily, weekly, but she needs to know when to stop drinking and start studying, etc., etc. And to brush her teeth. She's got to go from 0% responsible to 100% responsible for herself. She's got 18 years to do it. Let's look at your curve. When she's 0.0, how responsible for her are you? 100. And by the time she's 18, how responsible do you need to be? Say it loud, say it proud. 0. You don't say it, it won't happen. Okay. Can you see these two curves? Yeah. They're mathematically related. 100, 0, 99, 1, 98, 2, 97, 3. This curve doesn't come up unless this curve goes down. This is the curve of childhood resilience, and this is the curve of parental letting go. And I'm talking about letting go of the instrumental parts of parenting. The overseeing, protecting, guiding, directing, reminding, cajoling, bribing, threatening, reminding. There's a lot more. All those active managerial things we do, letting go. With respect to anxiety, this is the curve of a child becoming anxious on her own behalf. This is the curve of a child becoming adaptively anxious. And this is the curve of a parent not acting out on their own anxiety. We're really anxious about our kids. It makes it hard to follow this curve. The first 20,000 years of child rearing, by the way, our parental curves looked like this. And everybody died. Okay, not everybody. But the history of childhood is an awful, bloody read. It's terrible. Okay? So we're way better. But instead of doing this, we have gone too far, too much of the time, and our parental curves look like this. I'm going down, I swear to God. I'm at 80% age 14. But if I'm 80% age 14, she's only at 20%, and now she's got to go on a crash course on reality. Much better to let go a little bit at a time. So for example, and it starts early. So she's 4 years old. If you want, you're coming home from Halloween, she's got a big bag full of junk food. Oh, you want to get your managerial hands all over that. It's screaming out cavities and wired on sugar and who knows what else. But if you want, you could let her be her own Halloween candy haul hoarder. You can turn over control to her. What's the worst that could happen? It's not a pretty sight, I know. You may have some cleanup on your hands. But talk about a non-catastrophic painful failure. They just got to watch her brother enjoy his candy for the rest of the month. Next year she'll be a brilliant candy manager. We can let go of these things a little bit at a time. What about homework? What about overseeing your child's academic experience? On a normal developmental curve for a child, if your child has a learning issue or ADHD, you may have to adjust a little bit, but the window is between grade 4 and grade 6. By the end of grade 6, you want to have resigned from the role of homework police. You're done. Lots of kids can do it before. Somewhere between the ages of grade 9 and grade 11, you want to have respectfully turned academic experience over to your child. Why? Because she's not missing that part of her brain that allows her to be anxious on her own behalf. I'll say it again, it's a bit of a complicated sentence. She's not missing that part of her brain that allows her to be anxious on her own behalf. The only thing that keeps that part of her brain from kicking in is you do the worrying for her. Kids actually don't want to suck at life. Now work at things. There's a basic emotional development that has to take place here, and it's really worth knowing about it. One way to think about this is to divide this 18 years we're talking about into two sections. The first section is 0 to 6. Let's call that the first world. Because in that first world, a child's experience of the external world, the big bad world out there, is entirely mediated by your parental mind. You are completely in control. You're basically God at this stage of development. You tell me what I can and can't do. I may not like it, but you rule by fiat. That's the way it is. I don't have to have any anxieties about the world because you do the worrying for me. That's really, and that's appropriate. Right? That's the way it should be in the first world. And when you're happy with me, everything's amazing. And when you're not happy with me, when I haven't done what I was supposed to, when I've been a bad girl, I feel guilt and shame. The emotions of the first world, guilt and shame. That's what's going on. And what keeps me on the straight and narrow is that horror I have in my mind of drawing your judgment and your negative judgment of me. That horrible, guilty, ashamed feeling. That's what keeps me, insofar as it keeps me on the straight and narrow, that's what it's all about. If I'm worried about my report card in kindergarten, it's because mommy and daddy will be disappointed. That's appropriate first world thinking. But by the time I get to first year university, in fact, a lot sooner than that, but by the time I get out there in the big world, let's say first year university, if my biggest concern about my report card is that mom and dad will be disappointed, I got problems. And that's where Stephen, the boy who dropped out, still was. By the time I get out into the big world, and we're talking now grade 7, grade 8, and certainly high school into undergraduate, by this stage of development, I need to be anxious on my own behalf. I have to have gone from the guilt and shame economy to the anxiety economy. It's a hard step to make, but we all can make it. I can remember my own life around this age 5 and a half, age 6. We took a big holiday out east for the summer, my family. I have 3 older sisters. There's 4 of us packed in the family station wagon driving around Prince Edward Island. One day we go into a souvenir store and I see this magical vial of PEI sand. Red sand, black sand, white sand, a cork and top, 49 cents. It's just, I have to have it. It's brilliant. Mommy, can I have it? She says no. Please, no. Please, no. She says no. So I go and ask Dad. Strategy? Did you ask your mom? No. See, I wasn't on the straight and narrow that often, but no. He says no. Please, no. Please, no. Please, no. So what did I do? When no one was looking, I slipped it in my pocket. And no one saw. I got the thing. All right. We leave the souvenir store. We get in the car, and we drive off down the highway. Within about 4 or 5 kilometers, I have a real 5-year-old's problem. I need to see it. Just one glimpse. I just need to make sure it's the brilliant treasure that I thought it was. I just need one little look at it. So I fight for elbow room in the back seat, and I get my hand in my pocket, and I just get... But of course, as soon as it sees the light of day, my sister sees it too. Dad! He's got the thing! He stole it! I'm busted. Oh, painful. Yeah. We turn around, the car stops, turns around, back we go down the highway to the souvenir store. Out we get, me and my dad. Can you feel the guilt and shame? Yeah. And as we get to the cash, I'll never forget what Dad says. As I'm handing the thing over, he says, "Look what he's got in his hot little hand." Pee my pants right there. Right? But everything changed in the next moment because the owner, this was not just a clerk, she owned the store and she was mad. And she looked down at me and she said, "You did what? You know that's a crime?" She starts using words like penitentiary, justice of the peace. She got my attention. You know, forget the guilt and shame world. I'm in the fear economy now. Right? It's the end of my criminal career right there. External authority can create anxiety in our kids. We cannot. We are forever inhabitants of the first world in our children's minds. He's 15. We want to make him anxious about his marijuana use. Of course we do, because we're really worried about it. So we download 3 articles on marijuana and brain damage to make him anxious about it. It doesn't work. What does he do? He goes online and downloads 3 articles from California on how marijuana makes you more creative. Right back at you. Now, it's a tricky thing to parent at that moment because you're anxious for good reasons. The point here is that what we cannot do is get our kids to be anxious about the things we want them to be anxious about directly. All we can do is empower external authority to crack the whip when the whip needs to be cracked. like that clerk did for my dad. Boy, did I learn that. Fast forward 30 years. Sam, 4.5 years old, coming home from Honest Ed's, ironically, Honest Ed's, with hot Tic Tacs. He stole a thing of orange Tic Tacs from Honest Ed's. So we get in the car, we drive back down. Sam's got his allowance jar, he's going to pay for it or give it back. But the moment's too much for him, he cries. And you know what the clerk says to him? "Oh, sweetie, you can keep the Tic Tacs." She didn't do what I needed her to do. We need external authority to be authoritative in our kids' lives. When your kids come to school, they're not just learning about reading, writing, and arithmetic. They've come for our training in social reality. This is where it happens. Not at your dining room table. That's first world. This is where they're coming to learn how to be a part of society. They're learning about social reality. Look at all the stuff they're learning about at school. How to get along with their colleagues and peers. How to deal with responsibility. How to deal with authority. How to structure your day from 9 to 5. How to be adaptively anxious. All of these things are taking place. That's why she's coming to school primarily. Yeah, okay, there's the curriculum too. But boy, is the social learning an important part of it. That's what she's got to do, that kind of learning when she comes to school. And when she comes, she's going to need to know how reality works. And sometimes that's going to require non-catastrophic painful failure. So what that means is, when this school fails your child on a test, it doesn't mean that the education system isn't working. When this school fails your child, it means the education system is working. It's doing its job. So one of the key messages for parents these days is to empower external authority to be authoritative in your child's lives. We need to turn our children over to schools. So let me give you a scenario. Imagine you've got a grade 7 child, a student in grade 7, and she's really not pulling her weight. She's not working as hard on things. You feel like she's a bit of a Steven. You're feeling like you have to supervise her. You're feeling like you have to stay on her and nag her. Well, one of the things you can do is respectfully turn it over to her. She's old enough to manage her own school experience. But if you do that, and you find that she doesn't start to do her homework in a way that's getting her through the curriculum, she's starting to fail things, she's really not doing her job as a student, what I would encourage you to do is call the teacher and form an alliance with that teacher, an alliance of village elders, in which the two of you together talk about Marcy. I'm going to call her Marcy for some reason, okay? And in this conversation, the first thing you're going to want to say to that teacher is say, "Mrs. Smith, we trust you. Thank you." You want to start from a position of appreciation and trust for a couple reasons. One, teachers are used to being blasted by parents all the time. When parents call teachers, teachers often feel like they're being accused of not working hard enough on the problem. By the way, if you've had a teacher call you at home about a failed test, as a parent, it really feels like the teacher's kind of blaming you for not working hard enough. And what we easily get is a parent and a teacher playing a kind of hot potato game with the worry ball. Who's the one person not worried in this scenario? This is what we need to take a stand against. This is what this alliance is all about. It's not really about the math. The math will come along. It's the maturation we've got to work on right now. We've got to get Marcy more anxious on her own behalf. Mrs. Smith, thank you. We're so glad you're Marcy's teacher this year. That's step 1. Step 2. Tell her what you're going to stop doing. Give her the lay of the land at home. Give her some background information. We've decided to turn Marcy's homework and academic obligations over to her. We're resigning from the role of homework police. We've decided that we can't manage her schoolwork at this level because the harder we work, the less she works at. Whatever your story is, share it with the teacher. And then, and only then, can you go on to step 3 and say to that teacher, "So, Mrs. Smith, please feel authorized to be the teacher that's not only necessarily a good cop and loving and nurturing, but also, when you need to be, a bad cop too. Let her know it's not good enough. Fail her, literally or metaphorically. And don't let Marcy know you've had this phone call." I'm a big fan of the village elders talking behind kids' backs. So politically incorrect. It's so healthy. That's what we do as adults. We talk about the kids. And we build alliances so that together as a community, we can raise them. You know, I'm gonna pause. There's some other places we could drill down, but I'm actually curious to hear what's resonating, and or actually perhaps more importantly, what's clunking. The things that aren't quite making sense, the yeah buts, the challenges, or another thing that's helpful to talk about are drill down places where you've heard something but you need to know more about it to help in your own particular situation. So questions, reflections, challenges? Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. We try to do this thing where you relinquish authority to the kids, and then it doesn't seem like it's going well, and you get this yo-yo phenomenon where then you get more involved and kind of intense, and then things go well, and then you back off. So how do you deal with that where it doesn't feel like a strategy is working if you're leaving them with too much authority and things aren't going the way you hope that it would in the long run?
Did everybody hear the question? The question was, often what seems to happen is we back off, but then it's not good. So then we have to step back in, and then we're like we're in and we're out, something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, what you want to try to do is time it on these curves to know that you're following good policy. You have great consultants. As at this school, you have amazing consultants. So you can always find out, like, we're thinking of stepping back from managing her homework. She's in grade 7 or whatever it is. So that helps as a parent to know that you're in a solid place in terms of our science and learning about child development and pedagogy. Then, when you step back, you have to be prepared for it to possibly get worse before it gets better. And the mistake that a lot of parents make is stepping back too soon. Because a lot of times kids need to test that you're not going to step back in. And also, they need to get a little bit burnt to get a sense of how that's going to feel and what's going to happen there. So sometimes parents can really be tested on this. But what you're doing when you don't step back is actually, you're being very respectful. You're trusting that she has it in her. Basically, what you're needing to do when it comes to this issue around homework is something that you all did intuitively when your children were young. A great researcher, a Russian researcher called Vygotsky, called this the proximal zone of development. Here's what it means. All around the globe, parents intuitively interact with their infants and toddlers as if they have competencies that haven't quite yet emerged. So in other words, here's the child's developmental level. The parent interacts with the child as if she's right here, anticipating those competencies. It's the proximal zone. It's not 2 steps ahead. It's right here. Example, the great example is language. When she was 3 months old, if you were a good scientist, you would have been mute when changing her diaper. There's no evidence of language here. Right? But good parents are bad scientists. What we do is, changing her diaper, we fully expect her to be a talking, sentient person, and we interacted with her as if she is. And she takes that right out of our mind. Part of minding our kids is having in our mind the vision of where they're going to be next. When you have a teenage child, this works really well with teenage boys who really don't want to be told nothing. Okay? And there's all kinds of things you could see to correct. But if instead you treat your 17-year-old boy, who's very boy-like sometimes, as if he's a young man, respectful, it will work like a charm, and he will come up to it. But because we don't like what we see, we so easily come down and try to parent it out of him. Okay? This is another moment like that. She's in grade 7, you've decided to step back, and in fact, you don't see her doing anymore. She's just watching more home renovation shows. You're not seeing more studying. What's happening? Your anxiety is going up. You're started to lose faith in what I said tonight, which was she's not missing that part of her brain that allows her to be anxious on her own behalf. You're beginning to doubt that. You're thinking she's missing that part of her brain. We have to say, again, recall. Time to read another conference call. Time to talk with the teacher. Go in. Spend time. Spend time with the professionals here who are experts and authority figures in her life and who can motivate her emotionally in ways you can't. Have that meeting of minds. Find out what their plans are. Make sure that they know how to kick her butt a little bit if that's what she needs. Okay? You want her to fully know, wow, Mrs. Jones, they really see me as playing an important role in Miranda's life. Does that help with the question? Kinda? It's hard to get your head around this. It's scary. It's scary to let go of control. A lot of what I'm talking about is frankly frightening to us. Let's go back to that park moment, right? The scene in the sandbox. Remember, the take home from that is the best thing you could do is stay in the park bench, even though your daughter just bonked someone over the head with a sifter. But it was adequately parented, right? We know, like, what's the right thing to do there? As long as there was a real misdemeanor, and there was both theft and assault, as you'll recall, okay? And as long as the other parent was appropriate, you know, I was stern, but I think it was appropriate, a good piece of learning just happened. So the best thing to do is stay in that park bench. But think about what courage it'll take to sit in that park bench. Come on, you're imagining what all the other parents are thinking about you, for sure. It takes courage and conviction these days to parent your child this way, to respectfully give her the right amount of autonomy, step by step, so she can learn to take on the world. But boy, will she be a powerful person when you do this. And I get it. It's hard to trust. Yeah?
Can you just explain a little bit more when you talked about minding your child and that they need to see you validating them but without praise?
Thank you for that question. It's not asked all that often. It's like, yeah, the minding. Let's get to the school and the homework and the things that make us anxious. But I'm glad you went back to it. It's so important. Let's give an example. Let's imagine our 6-year-old girl. She decided to bring home her art project. It's been stuffed in her cubby for 2 weeks. She's brought it home at lunchtime. She's unfolded it. She says, "Oh, look at my art project." You know, it's a big brown piece of paper. It's kind of ripped. There's some macaroni stuck here, and some black paint kind of spilled here, some cloth, a yellow house or a horse there. Look at my painting. It's so easy for us to say, "What a great painting." We lie. It's so beautiful. Did she spill that paint? You're such a good artist. You know, beware of praise. Beware of, you know, when you praise it, you've just put it on an evaluation continuum. You've just given it a gold star. If it's good, it could have been bad. You've just said to her, "I'm interested in the good stuff." You've just given her a building block in what a great current researcher calls a fixed mindset. And if you're curious about that, we can double back on that concept. The other thing about praise, pay attention. If you praise in a moment like that, see what happens next. I bet you what happens next is nothing. That's where it ends. "Wow, that's so good. You're really good. What's for lunch?" Like, that's it. There's nowhere to go. So parents often say, "Well, what should I say?" And it's actually not about this organ. It's about this organ. Doesn't matter what you say. You could probably grunt and it would work. If what you're doing here is being interested. Being interested in your child is a something. And it's harder than you might think. With our anxieties and our own over-identification with success, it's harder than you might think to be in a calm, interested, receptive place where you're curious about that and what it means to her. After all, she chose to bring it home today. There's a million things to be curious about here. So you might just, you could maintain focused attention. You could ask a question. It's really not about here. It's about getting to that interested place. And believe me, it's harder than you might think. And then when you do, it opens up. And then she tells you she didn't even stick the macaroni there. That was Miranda. Miranda stuck it there. And Miranda stole her hat at recess. And in fact, she's wanted to talk about Miranda the whole time. And you missed it because you went right to praise. So, it's being aware that what we want to see is our child's nature, not how good they are. To be aware of how focused we are, all of us, in this competitive mindset. The teachers here are saying the girls are struggling with competitiveness. We've turned education into a marks competition. We've really scared the bejeebers out of young people. And the reason we're doing that, I think, is because there's an implicit mindset in the background of our North American Western world. It's not usually named, it's implicit, but I'm going to try and give it some words. If it were to speak, this mindset would be something like this. It's the adults talking to the children, and it goes like this. Children, you're going to grow up soon. There is a finite set of adult positions available. There's not enough to go around. It's a competition. It's all about the marks. Go. Something like that. And it's not true. It's not true. It may be true, it looks like it's going to be true that our kids are likely to be the first generation who have less disposable income than their parents for the first time in quite a few generations. That's true. That part's getting worse. But that's about the only one. In terms of unemployment rates, wage earning power in their 30s and 40s. All of these things are actually very promising. The likelihood is that our kids may have a harder time going on a Club Med vacation every year. That's the bad news. Certainly not bad enough to create the dire forecast we've created for young people. So we get caught up in this competition, us parents, and we get worried with trying to get those marks and to get into those good schools, whatever a good school is. Schools are about fit. Schools are about going to the right place for your interests and talents and whatever you're looking for at the age of 18. The beginning of emerging adulthood, by the way. So minding is finding a way back to what's really important, which is seeing a child for who he or she is, especially where she finds her flow. And I really point to that concept of flow. It's a wonderful antidote to the Marx neurosis that's sweeping North America. Thanks for your question. Yeah?
So you talked about competition and the fact that many find there's a lot of competition and they're getting anxiety from it. So what can you do as a parent to help them lean in? Like, go to the soccer game or whatever, or don't go, whichever, right? Like, if you don't like it, don't go. Like, because you're at that age where, I think there was a discussion at the assembly about how do you give up something that you've done for a long time? And they have anxiety about it. That would be one aspect. But then what about trying new things? Well, there's lots of competition, so they don't even try anymore. They don't even bother to try because they're afraid of failing. And
Yeah, they don't want to take risks.
to me, that's my response to that was, well, that's the biggest failure of all because you haven't tried it all. So you
Yeah.
don't know.
A couple of thoughts. In fact, that does take us back, and it's such a useful concept, to this term fixed mindsets. Are people aware? I'll just give you very briefly where that's coming from. There's a researcher at Stanford. Her name is Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. She's got a trade book. It's at Indigo Amazon. You can get it. But basically she's a laboratory researcher. She's not a clinician. She's not in a clinical office as I am. She does empirical research with students. And she's looked at grade 2 students and grade 10 students and undergraduates. And no matter what age she's working with, she can categorize learners into one of two categories: fixed mindset, growth mindset. And by the way, we're getting more and more of these fixed. Now, what are they? A fixed mindset. Now, these are, again, this is an implicit mindset. The idea of an implicit thing means it's in my mind, but I'm not necessarily aware that it's in my mind. If it were explicit, then I would know that I know it. Implicit means it's something I believe, but I'm not even aware that I'm believing it. This implicit mindset, the fixed mindset, is something like this. People have gifts and talents, and these are fixed, they're lifelong. And I got to figure out what mine are. So, I'm good at sports and bad at school, or I'm good at arts and bad at sciences, or I'm good at reading. And it doesn't matter how you carve up the pie, but you see these as fixed properties. Kids with a growth mindset have a very different way of looking at the world. They're like more just automatically like what Malcolm Gladwell would talk about, the 10,000 hours thing. The more I do something, the better I get at it. Playing volleyball right now, I'm getting better at it. I don't play basketball, but I guess the idea like, oh, you play basketball, you must be getting good. It's just simply an exposure idea. These mindsets deeply color students' academic experience. When you have a fixed mindset, the way mistakes and failure feel is extremely painful. From the fixed mindset, when you screw up and fail things, it means you're not as good as you thought at it, or you're not good at all, or you suck. And so fixed mindsets stay away from areas where they perceive they're not going to do well. Growth mindsets, students with growth mindsets literally see mistakes as that's where the opportunity for learning is. They're the ones that, wait, miss, before you go on, what was the capital of Australia? Oh, right. They can even laugh at that moment, because that's actually where the learning's happening. Now, Carol Dweck has never had to say which mindset is better, because it's kind of obvious, right? And we're struggling to grow children with growth mindsets. They're overly fixed. So being aware of playing into that fixed mindset is so critical. The other thing that, of course, is a part of this, I believe, it's something we haven't had a chance to talk about today, which is social media. And how often and to what extent young people, and I think particularly young women, are forming their identity online through likes and dislikes in their photo galleries and their Snapchats and so on. And it's a very precarious way to form a sense of self. And so you become very self-conscious. You're always having to evaluate how well you're doing. And so, I mean, we really do have a generation of young people who are experiencing more and more social anxiety. So sometimes the not striving and not trying because I'll fail is out of fear of being kind of socially humiliated. So that can also be a big driver. How do I help means diagnosing the problem, being aware of what's going on. Is she got a real fixed mindset? Is she also struggling with some of this, I call it the curated self struggle, where I've got this kind of official self online and I have to always sort of be managing public imagery, my public image and so on, so that you can empathize and understand her from that perspective. But that's exactly what she needs you to do. Empathize and understand. I just want to finish a thought there. If your question was, how do I help my anxious daughter? You were sort of, how do I help my kind of competitive daughter? But anxiety's in the mix. When your child's very anxious, or any person's anxious, it's very tempting, it's intuitive to try to talk them out of it. To tell them that the thing that they're scared of isn't so scary. And it never works. It's no more helpful than telling a sad person to buck up, right? It just doesn't work, because you're just contradicting their experience. What actually helps an anxious person, and again, it's counterintuitive, is to empathize with their worries. It can feel like you're actually putting fuel on the fire, because you're almost agreeing with it. But it actually, this is what brings them down. So if she's saying, I hate school, it's so competitive, and I'm so worried I'm not going to get into McGill, and I think that Susie's not going to have me in the club, to be able to say, oh, that sounds so stressful. It's really been on your mind all week. I watched you hardly ate a bite last night. It's really hard right now for you. And deep empathetic statement, that's actually what will center her. You're actually minding her. You're telling her what you see. And it helps her understand her own emotional experience, and that's what helps her to actually develop the resiliency to handle these feelings. Yeah?
Just wanted to ask something further to what you were just talking about those that are fixed mindset, period itself, that kind of line thinking that you're talking about. Is how difficult is it to deconstruct that? Is it like an enormous task, or is it?
Good question. It comes from a concerned place. All children, especially older children, middle school and high school, find the information, Carol Dweck's information, very interesting. It's a dialogue that I've had with lots of young people, and I know lots of parents who have. I think Carol's getting more and more stuff online for youth and children to work with, to reflect on themselves and to make the implicit explicit. When you make the implicit explicit, it doesn't go away right away. In fact, when we try to change implicit beliefs, it actually is a painful experience, because then we're aware of all, and we enter a stage of cognitive dissonance. I don't know what to believe. So, opening up the dialogue, and then once again minding it, listening, reflecting back what you're hearing and seeing, gives your young person a chance to understand and label and name her own experience. It's a big way of how we master things. Our own feelings and how children will master their own. Does that help? Yeah.
Maybe one more
Can we do one more question? I don't want to lose too many more people because I have a special treat. I want to show you something before we go. I don't want you to leave before you see it. Okay? Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this question, but when you're talking about the anxiety epidemic at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then you're talking about handing over the anxiety to our children and
Yeah.
letting them sort of sit with it and overcome it and face their fears, I guess would be one way of looking at it. I guess the question is, how much should we actually help them manage it in terms of, like, for example, we have a sort of an overscheduling epidemic that's going
Yes.
with it. So, I think to your point about, like, quitting something they've been doing a long time or starting something or not starting it, it's like, we've got, piano and swimming and soccer and skating and, like, gymnastics, and that's like every week. And soccer. That's like 6-year-olds, grade 1.
Wow. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, and so it's like, you don't want them to, not have a skill that they might want to, later in life, they're the kid that doesn't know how to skate and there's like a skating party. This is what my parents and my in-laws keep telling me. There's going to be all these skating birthday parties apparently, but my children are not going to know how to skate and it's going to be terrible. So I'm like, you know what, they hate skating and, it's like, do I take them out of skating because they hate it and their schedule's too full? Or do I say, you know what, like, you need to overcome, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, not that.
it's a,
You know what never helps is that we want to think that we can lecture or teach things into our kids and we
Yeah.
don't, right?
Yeah.
But thanks for your question. It's honest and like we can all relate to a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And in fact, part of your question is letting us know that yes, indeed in your life, the community in which you're parenting has a real impact
Yeah.
on your choices.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that too.
yeah.
What I would say, and I think that the kernel of your question is, okay, well, what can I do to help my child proactively, preemptively from being disorderly anxious? How can I help her become adaptively anxious? And, around the programming thing. And, it's a good reflection just to see how programmed we are. That, for 20,000 years, kids played when their parents weren't looking.
Yeah.
They slipped out the back door. Oh, good. And they got to go away. And they found an old stick and a broken wheel. And they created reality.
Yeah.
They created toys. And sometimes bad stuff happened.
Yeah.
It did. One summer we headed up north and our kids were, 3 and 5, and we were like, bring the noodles and bring the lilo, water, and snorkels, land toys. We had to build a box on top of the car to get all the equipment, the play equipment to the cottage, right? And then all of that stuff. We got up there, and I'm lucky enough that we share our island with cousins, and there's lots of little kids, and wouldn't you know it, all that equipment just stayed one day or for a week in where it was, and the kids went out onto the island and they sharpened sticks and they beat each other over the heads with them. And they called it gladiator wars. And they did it on an old rusty tent platform, like with rusty, and they did. And because we were all cousins, we could kind of let it, someone's going to lose an eye, but we let it happen. And no doubt, there were 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and I'm sure at one point, 5-year-old Hunter, who had to go into the ring with 8-year-old Dougie, who's kind of crazy, had some anxiety, right? And when little Alex was whittling his stick, and it went all the way, it went all the way through, he learned some frustration tolerance because he had to start again. Kids. I wish there was another 3 seconds. It's so cute as it turns out. Well, what did you notice? What struck you? It's not going to be on the exam. No, right on. I'm just curious. What
He noticed,
that?
he noticed his mother noticing him at the end.
That's true. It really changes at that moment, eh? Let's go to the first section. We'll go there, but let's start. What about the first opening section?
The joy of self-discovery.
Yeah, this is a flow state. This is a person in flow. It starts early, right? Our capacity to be deeply engaged in exploration of the world around us. You know, it's a reminder that children are passionate learners. No one had to say to him, okay, time for some shadow work, out in the back porch, 15 minutes. Took this one all by himself, right? A deep flow state. You know what's interesting too is a lot of times parents comment on how quiet the mom is for so long. You know, a lot of us would be sort of shivering, jabbering away, but because she's so quiet, we get to just watch this flow state. But she may have had to manage a bit of anxiety, right? He's not so steady. There's a couple of speed wobbles there, right? But she's letting it happen. She's not put him in bubble wrap, right? He's not wearing a helmet. She's aware that if he's going to fall, he'll bend in the middle, and he'll fall on his diapered bum, boom, or splat, as the case may be. And it might hurt, and he might cry. But it's exactly the kind of painful, non-catastrophic failure that an 18-month-old can handle. We're already working through our curves. And because she's not acting out on her anxiety, because she's giving him that autonomy, he has this wonderful, intense experience with the world around him. And yeah, you're right. He's just too darn cute. She laughs. She can't help it. But it all changes, doesn't it? And as you say, he sees her, but he sees her seeing him. So we go from that deep flow state to the minding moment. And I actually took the ending out, and let's look at it again, just the last 20 seconds. It runs from just before she laughs. Let's watch it again and see what happens. It's funny, he looks like, see how he actually puts his hands on his tummy, eh? As if to say, yeah, this is me playing with my shadow. Aren't I great? You know? When he sees his mom seeing him, he actually sees himself. It's a beautiful example of how kids take their sense of who they are out of our minds. But to do it, we need to be in this place of interested, supportive bystander, not actively managing the moment. We have to be over here. And when we are, we have the most rich, warm exchanges with our kids. And we do the most important thing we can do for them, which is keep track of them in our minds, understand their experience, and help them understand their own experience, understand who they are. Nothing can equip your daughter better for the big world out there than a clear sense of who she is. It's one of the things that children are struggling with more and more. I want to thank you for coming tonight. It's been a pleasure talking with you all, and I hope it's been helpful, and good luck